Arlington Finance Committee to order. First order of business is to our applause for the son of one of the members of the Finance Committee in Arlington's 2-1 Super 8 championship. My wife and I went, and we made the mistake of sitting with the kids because it was right in the middle of the thing. And then light dawned on us that they were never going to sit down. And so we had to go find another space. But I tell you that they closed off the balcony, so that wasn't being used, or the green seats. But that place was pretty full, and it was rocking. That was a heck of a game on that. But it was the third victory in the Super 8 by a public school in 27 years. So it was. Okay.
Yeah, a lot of tired players today. I think the absentee total may have been a little high at the high school today.
Actually, I checked with the principal, and kids actually came out in full force.
Oh, good. Oh, awesome.
So our whole feelings are good. I'll move the budget.
Now, are you spending enough on the hockey team?
So far, the request for more ice time hasn't come in. I'm expecting it, though.
Okay, we'll take care of the minutes later on. Tonight, the full night will be dedicated, if necessary, to the largest single budget that we have, the public schools. And everybody, thank you very much for getting us the budget several weeks ago. We appreciate that. And I'd like to turn this over to Superintendent Bodie to make a presentation however she'd like, and then we can get into some questions and discussion. So, Superintendent?
All right. Well, it's nice to see you all again this week. So I'm absent a CFO. I think that you all know that. In fact, Al today was with us as we've done interviews. So I will answer the questions to the best of my ability. Certainly if you have questions, which, by the way, other than I had one question, which I'm going to get to Alan Jones later this week. I will be happy to write them down if there's something very technical I cannot answer, and run it by our interim when she's in on Thursday. Right. You've seen this format of the presentation before. The agenda is the first part of it is just to give you an overview of all of the people involved in the development of this budget. And then we're going to talk about the FY17 to date. We'll look at some major discussion points about FY18, which includes school enrollment and some of the recommendations that have come from the School Enrollment Task Force, and also then looking at our technology and special education. The next page will give you the members of the school committee, which we have 3 members here, and the chair of the budget subcommittee. In fact, another member of the budget subcommittee, Chrissy Allison Ampey, Lynn Carden, and Bill Painter. So I won't go through this budget timeline, but it's pretty much the same as we have done in the past, where we really begin this process in the fall. And in December, the school committee hears from our principals and curriculum leaders as to their assessment of where we are and what we need yet. And you have all of the, going on to page 6, you have all of the people, principals, central office, curriculum coordinators, in case you would like to know any of their names. So let's just jump right away to the FY17 year to date. One of the good pieces of news is that the Stratton School is on schedule, and there seems to be no impediment to them the school opening in September of this year. And again, it bears thank you to the whole community for the fact that this is actually happening. And people who've now started to have some visits to the school are very, very impressed with what they see. And I think that that's something that could be arranged for members of the Finance Committee down the road, should they want to see the school. Hard hat still, though, I think. We are also very much moving forward on the AHS renovation rebuild project. At this point, we have been invited into the next stage, which involves getting the project team together. And that is having an owner's project manager. Interviews the RFP is going out very soon, with our expectation that we would have an OPM for the project sometime in June. At that point, then we will be looking to the OPM to help us with the process of finding a designer for the project. That will probably take the balance of the summer into the early fall, and it's at that point that the outreach to the community in terms of forums and input will begin. So the process is, first of all, we have to decide what we're going to do with the building and where the siting of it is going to be, and then how the building is going to match the educational program. So a significant amount of time during this phase will be looking at the educational program and making sure that the building that we recommend is a building that's going to fit that program. So prepare yourself for a long journey on this. I expect that we're going to be looking at 5 to 6 years as we go forward with this, and it'll have an acceleration. Right now it seems like it's going slow, but there's that old expression, you go slow to go fast, and that's where we are. The Gibbs planning. Again, this is we spent a lot of time last year in community discussions about what is the best alternative to deal with the growing enrollment, particularly at the Addison Middle School. And as you recall, we had a couple of options, one of which was to do an addition on the school, and the other was to reclaim the Gibbs School for a 6th grade school. With the approval of the voters in June, we have moved forward with that. Plans are underway to begin the renovation July 1. And in fact, there's regular meetings to make sure that this happens. And if you would like to see any of the documentation, and I say this for people who'll be watching tonight, we have on the district website, on the quick links on the side, facilities. And if you go to that, that will lead you into any of these building projects, all of the documents. And I think one of the challenges with the Arlington High School one is that the documentation on that is even going to exceed whatever we have for these other projects. And we have a communications committee that has been, that will be forming to figure out what is the best way to keep the information current with the community. The School Enrollment Task Force continued to meet this year, with the focus on what to do about the Hardy enrollment growth there. And the recommendation that we discussed last week is that we're going forward with a recommendation for a 6th classroom addition to Hardy, with some look also at how to also deal with the course-based cafeteria. We have had with the a Safe and Supportive Action Plan grant this year from AEF, which is looking very at each school and at the district level where are areas that we can improve either the professional development for teachers, what we do to make sure that all of our schools have strong, safe, and supportive environments. And the plan is that we will have action plans for each school in June. And then Arlington is very much in the forefront in the state in how to reimagine education using technology as a tool. In fact, this year we were invited to participate in a consortium called MAPLE. It's an acronym that is co-sponsored by Learn Launch, which has been a long-time organization that has promoted the use of technology in schools, and the Department of Education. And we were one of the 12 original Catalyst districts to be part of this because of the kind of work that we're doing and how we can be models to other districts in the state in using technology to reimagine education. And this is such an important work that we're doing right now. I've asked I should have introduced you right away, Laura Chesson. I think you've probably met a lot of these people over the years. But just to, just give a quick overview of what this means and maybe what we did last week.
Sure. So I think most people are aware that the Thompson Elementary School is a one-to-one school. We've had a one-to-one pilot and then expanded at the 6th grade at the middle school. And we have now gone to BYOD, which brings your own device for grades 6, 7, and 8. So students who want to bring their own device and take it home can do that. As we look forward to the rebuild of Stratton, that school will also be a one-to-one school. And as we look to the 6th grade to move to Gibbs, that school would become a one-to-one school, and the devices that they have now would be remain at the Audison, so that we'll be expanding the number of devices that we have there. But it's beyond just the devices. Last week we had a forum that was co-sponsored by Vision 2020 and the Arlington Educational Foundation, where 20 teachers from grades K all the way up to 12, and actually we had someone come talk about special education beyond high school, came into the town hall, and members of the community were able to come in and hear 3 presentations by these teachers. Although the turnout was small, the people that came were very impressed by what they heard, and it really gave teachers an opportunity to talk to the community about how education looks different from when they went to school. Yes, some things were about technology, but others were just about personalized learning. Particularly at the 6th grade in the civics and social studies program. There was a gentleman there from the high school who spoke about the use of Hamilton to help students understand civics at the high school level. We have a woman at the middle school who's using a special IR camera, infrared camera, in order to try to teach social studies, and all the way to our social emotional programs, which help our kindergartners and our elementary school students. So those are just some of the things. As one of the catalyst districts, sometime probably over the next 12 months or so, we'll be having other districts across the state come to visit us and see what we're doing in these areas.
Right. The infrared is for science.
Oh, sorry.
All right, so the other trend that has not abated is that our enrollment continues to grow. The change from last year to this year is we've grown by 220 students. And we can see that there'll probably, hopefully not be that great an increase this year, but we don't see it flattening out. In the next graph, this is the school, the district's student enrollment projection, and this graph contains all the students also in out-of-district placements. But I think that in our projections, and we'll see if this happens, we would see in 2018-19, so the year after next, we would see Arlington district growing to over 6,000 students. And continuing after that, on the next graph, you will see this was Dr. McKibben's demographic research that he's now done a couple of these graphs. This is the most recent, which was August 2000, a year ago August, so 2015. And you can see here what the trend looks like, and we're going to be over 6,000 for many years. And even when we get to 2031, 32, we're still probably at around 6,000 students. So what we're doing right now with adding classrooms onto schools, retrofitting Gibbs for a 6th grade school, are expenses that we need to do because the enrollment is only going to continue to grow, and we need this extra space. So the school committee a number of years ago, and you've seen this slide before, but it's worth repeating, has 4 areas of vision, and every year we do particular initiatives around these vision statements to move us forward in that direction. And the most important one is that every graduate will be ready for college, career, and active citizenship. And I think it's important we say active citizenship, but one of the things I'm very proud about in our district is the number of community outreach programs that exist, community service projects. it's a value that we try to inculcate in our students, and I actually try to highlight that in my newsletter because it's something that I value, the school committee values, and I know that all of my colleagues do. We're always looking to continually improve what we do. It's just part of the culture of the district, and in every single area. I think that even with this hockey game, everybody's going to say, well, what could we have done better? That's just the way that will be for next year. So then we also want to be very cost effective, and that's the reason we have our partnership too, is that we want to make sure that we do this the most cost effective way for the community. And we work very hard to maintain a very collaborative relationship with all of the town departments. So what I want to focus on right now are the budget priorities that we have for next year that we do not have this year. So these are additions next year, and it's gone through a very thorough vetting process as to what rises to the top. The actual number of asks, and this is even a cold list, goes close to $4 million. I mean, that is just something that we do not have. So we've had to look very carefully at what are the most important that we need to fund. And of course, at the top of our list is support for our high needs students. And one of the supports in our budget for next year is that we need to fund the out-of-district tuition by an additional $1 million. I know that you're aware that there's been a deficit in the school budget, which I'm very happy to report that I know that there will be no issues in terms of closing it in terms of funds. But the cause of it, the main cause of it is the out-of-district tuitions we've had since this time last year. So when we budgeted for out-of-district last year, that's where we were at that point in time, but things change. And they changed over the summer, they changed last spring, over the summer, and certainly into the fall. And we feel that this is the amount of money that we need to deal with the current tuitions that we have, that we know we have, and what we will need for next year. We have another elementary learning specialist. This is a special education teacher who will be assigned to an elementary school. And after much thought on this, we really feel we need another elementary literacy coach. We have made tremendous improvements, changes in our elementary reading and writing program. We have 2 literacy coaches for the whole district, and they're too spread out. And in order to increase their effectiveness in helping teachers be more effective in all of our programming, and also effective in how you differentiate instruction, we feel that was necessary. We need to increase social work at both a half-time at both the high school and the middle school. And in keeping with the work we're doing around social and emotional learning, we have asked for a director for social emotional learning and guidance. If you recall, we years ago, not actually that long ago, we had a director of guidance. In fact, 10 years ago, we had a director of guidance. It was just director of guidance, and then that position expanded quite a bit. And then when that person retired, we just never replaced someone to fill that role. So it's something that in order to keep the work that we're doing going forward, this is something that we identify we need. So as enrollment grows, so do our school enrollments, and we have schools that have gone up 100, 150 students with no additional supports to our elementary principals. At the secondary level, perhaps we need more, but we do have assistant principals and deans, but we have no assistant principals at the elementary level. In many districts with the size of elementary schools that we have, do have assistant principals. In fact, I think in the EDCO district, we're the only district that does not.
When they get up to 450.
When they get to 450. and we have 4 that are at 450 or above. So we're not going to fund all of those, but we are going to pilot 2 halftime assistant principals at 2 of our larger schools, and then we're also going to provide some additional support for our principals in the way of another behavior support person. So for retention and compensation of faculty and staff, I mean, we have an extraordinary staff. We really have excellent teachers who come every day, dedicated, they work hard, they really care about our students, and in fairness to them, we want to compensate them for their great work. Next year will be the 3rd year of our contract, which means that salaries will go up 2%. We will be entering into negotiations next year. We also, for many years, for a while there, we had to reduce our budget for curriculum materials and textbooks, actually more digital materials these days. But we've had launched a number of curriculum initiatives in the last few years, and this money will help continue the rollout of the elementary math and science programs. We're also going to roll out new social studies and civic materials at the elementary and secondary level. And then, of course, enrollment growth. When you have more students, you need more teachers. This may be inadequate, but we have 2.0 reserve positions. We probably already know where those positions are going to go at this point, to be honest. And then we have an additional desktop support person as we, again, increase in technology. And this was a strong request from our teachers. Now, as I said, we had a lot more requests than we're able to fund. And I'll talk a little bit about how we even got to even fund what we have here. But the school committee has felt very strongly that we needed to have more of those requests included in next year's budget. So what they decided is to take some of the circuit breaker money that we will receive next year and apply it to next year's budget. How we've been operating is this. Last year we incurred expenses, and there's a formula. You go and you apply for circuit breaker money. This year that money gets paid out in quarterly installments. And then what we've been doing for a number of years, we take that money and we apply to the next year's budget. So sort of a 3-year process. The money that we will receive next year in quarterly payments exceeds what actually we had this year in the budget. And I know that Mr. Cardin is here and wants to explain a little bit more about that before I probably go into what we're going to apply it toward.
Hello, everyone. Good to see everyone again. So I'll just go over it quickly because it's only $300,000 in a $60 million budget. But this is the chart that I handed out. And basically, the blue line is our eligible expenses. Those are what we submit to the state under the circuit breaker for reimbursement. And there's a somewhat complicated formula, but we only get a small portion of those funds back. So the chart is a bit misleading in that the gap between the blue line and the red and green line is actually much bigger. The blue line is on the left-hand side key, and the red and green line are on the right-hand side key. But this just shows what the overall trends. So you'll see in the blue line that our expenses actually went down in 2016, and that means that the circuit breaker funds we receive next year are going to go down. So you see in 2017 our circuit breaker funding goes down from 1.9 million to 1.7 million. That's what we actually are receiving right now, this current year. So our past practice would be to only spend the 1.7 million next year, because by the end of this year we will have that in the bank. But as Kathy explained, We have had a large increase in out-of-district expenses this year. We are able to cover it in the budget, but when we roll those funds, when we roll those expenses forward, that drains funds that we need from regular education in the budget. So we know, or we expect that when we submit this year's funds, which have been increased quite a bit, to 6.9 million, when we submit that for reimbursement next year, we're going to get a large increase in our circuit breaker funding next year. We expect it to be about 440,000. That's not etched in stone. That's subject to lots of things, but based on the governor's budget, there should be sufficient funding in there to get us to that level. So our proposal was to take 300,000 out of that 440 extra that we're going to get, and spend it next year and not hold it over. So what the effect of that is the green line. So instead of dipping down on the red line under our old practice, and we have the green line, we go up a little bit in spending, and it smooths out the curve. So what we're doing is just smoothing out our spending, and we make it up, that 300,000, we make it up over the next 3 years. We'll spend a little bit below what we're getting in, and then we'll be back on track by 2022. So I know that was in the newspaper, and it's very confusing, and I just wanted to explain. It was an initiative by the Budget Subcommittee. We felt very strongly that what we were doing is very conservative. We expect to get 2.1 million in circuit breaker next year, but based on our past practice, we hold the money for a year before spending it. This way, we're taking a little bit because of the extraordinary expense increase we've had, and smoothing out the curve so that we have a bit smoother a bit smoother spending increase going forward.
Okay, thanks. So what did we allocate?
Okay, just from
Yeah.
that, are there any questions on that, what's happening there? Charlie?
Don't we have a special education reserve that we put money into? A stabilization fund?
We do. We have a stabilization in the town, that the one you're referring to. We do have that, and we're going to, there's a new form of something like that that's part of the new regulations under the modernization that we're going to town meeting to create this spring.
But we're actually going to most likely spend most of that this year.
Most of, so you're gonna empty out the existing stabilization fund, is that what you're saying?
We don't know the exact amount yet. We'll know before town meeting. But it looks like we're gonna take most of that to cover the $800,000 in additional expenses we've had this year.
Thank you.
Okay,
It-
anybody else?
Is your question about where does the circuit breaker money sit?
No.
No, okay.
It was about probably 4 years ago or something like that, we set up this
Mhm.
fund
Right.
that we were gonna be contributing to every year. The school was gonna be contributing to it every year, and I know that it was building up, and I was just wondering how much of it we were using in this process.
Well, this is not a year we'd contribute. We're going to
Apparently.
pull. That was the idea. It was supposed to be there for a rainy day, and the rainy day is here.
What is it that's caused the increase this year, and can you project anything about that for the future?
I would become a very rich woman if I could figure this one out, how to predict it. I don't know.
Let me just say that. I thought that for a while now, you've been able to, with one thing and another, manage it pretty well. You
Yeah.
had someone, hopefully there's still someone who's overseeing the special students and watching, trying to keep this
Yep.
under control, et cetera.
The things that we don't have control over, though, for example, we don't have control over when students move into the district. And we've had a significant amount of that additional 800,000, it was actually just shy of that, from move-ins. We also have, keep in mind that when we budget, we budget back in February, and we set a number at that point in time. But traditionally what happens is that in the spring, when you've gone through the school year and students may not make progress or they're in a special program, you may have students that are recommended for out-of-district placement. And so while those we have a better window on in terms of looking at their progress during the year, it's the students that perhaps move in that we have no window on at all. And we occasionally have years like this, and we did back in 2010 where we had a significant number of move-ins, and this is another year like that. So what we have done in the past is when we budget out of district tuitions, we pretty much budget what are the actuals at that point in time, or with slight projections, but they're pretty close to where we are. And last year's projections did not meet what we actually experienced, and that's the issue.
Is it possibly just attributable to the increased population that you have in the schools, or is this year beyond that in terms of the sort of
That has
behavior?
it's a factor, for sure. Our total number has gone up. You know, we've had I remember a year where we were down to around 69, but we're well over 100 now, 110, 112. And even that changes. We have students that come back into district. We've had 2 come back into district just recently from programming. So I wish that we could entirely predict it, but I think one of the things you'll see in a graph that we have at the back, you've seen something like this before, and if you mind, I just jump ahead, it's page 23. What we've looked at, yeah, you've seen the shape of this graph before. And what this is the growth in actuals from a prior year. And, you know, we've had a year from FY15 to 16, which was a year where we actually had a decrease. But then that year, from 16, the actuals, to 17 projected, and we're still not through FY17, we're already over 14%. What's happening in 18 is we're budgeting at 4% over budget. But this we had a graph a number of years ago that went back, you know, to the mid-2000s. I don't know.
It's interesting, the course of action that you've taken to try to smooth out the special education and use of the circuit breaker money to smooth things out a bit. And I understand that. I'm wondering if the school department would consider taking it from the revenue side to the expenditure side. So the town sets aside for you, as far as into the calculation for the total amount of appropriation, 7%. The trouble is Mr. Foskett has pointed out over the last couple of years, when you think it's going to be below 7%, you take that money and you spend it elsewhere. If we allocate 7% and you think it's only going to be 4%, then why not take that 3% and instead of spending it elsewhere, put it into a savings account for the future. In other words, if you budgeted 7% period or consistently over a period of time, and if you think it's going to be less than that, budget it at still 7%. At the end of the year, you're going to have flexibility with reserve accounts for special education, put it into the special education, and then when it shoots up again the next year unexpectedly, you have the money there. And you don't have to scramble at the end of the year to try to cover it.
Right, we did put $325,000 into that reserve account last year because our expenses did go down. It may not have been the full 4% or whatever, but it was definitely.
Well, you know, that's money you had left at the end of the year. What I'm talking about is always budgeting 7% at least, no matter what you think it's going to be next year. And so you're not, you're not spending on other purposes.
What?
Okay, Charlie, you wanna?
Yeah, thank you for reminding me that I asked that question previously. To my point, the point here is that this graph is very illustrative here on page 23, because the difference is about $1.8 to $2 million a year in each of those 2 years in the special education spending. And in both of those years, which I recall being somewhat agitated about, we spent that money in the regular education. So it's not only budgeting the 7%, it's sticking to the 4%, or whatever our metric is on the general academic side. And we just haven't done that. When we have a good year meaning lower expenses in special education, we turn around and spend the money on the regular education. And now, it's very nice that you're trying to work out how to smooth out the impact here. But you could have, had you done it the other way and not spent that money, you would have no problem at all this year.
Well, may I?
Yes.
That assumes that the monies that we have for general ed are adequate to the enrollment growth. I understand that we've all worked very closely to try to figure out a formula for the enrollment growth. But the fact of the matter is, as we try to provide it's not just classroom teachers, it's all the support people and special education people and specialists and social workers. All of as the numbers grow, we need to fund those positions. When you have a year that spikes over, you have to cut something out of the funds that we use to fund general education, because we have a budget. We're trying very hard to stay within the budget. So you may have a year where general education doesn't get the funding that it needs. We defer getting curriculum materials, or we defer having professional development, or people doing. So there's a deferment that goes on there when special education costs increase. And so while, yes, we could talk about a methodology for maintaining special evenness, we also think about how do we keep an evenness with general education in light of the kind of enrollment growth that we're seeing. Another metric to look at is we're not overspending on education in general. Our per pupil cost is well below the state average. And that's a what we're able to accomplish is a testament to the fact that we're not spending what the average in the state is spending. We're certainly not spending what a lot of our districts around us are spending, and yet we are getting results. So it's managing how you can also keep general education going at a very high level of excellence, while also trying to even out the effect of special education variance. So yes, I think that you're correct. In some years there may be, in fact there probably has been. I've actually been working with our accountant to do some coding out of all of that, but it's complicated. And I can talk more about that if you'd like. But yes, there's a little bit of that goes, and so there's a give and take over each year. And this year is a retraction in terms of, while we haven't frozen budgets, we've certainly asked people to be very, very conservative with what they spend.
Okay, Alan and then John.
I'm trying to understand get a better handle on the statistics. The variability, how much variation is there in the average cost per student with high needs from year to year?
I'd have to look into that. I couldn't tell you the answer to that.
And in terms of percentage of students with high needs as a percentage of the total student population, how much does that vary?
Can I go back to that last question?
Yeah.
I suppose one way to measure that would be to look at the variation that we have in per pupil. And our variation has not been significant
per pupil in the high needs.
Well, the per pupil in general, the per pupil, how the state measures what we're spending on special education per pupil.
I guess I'm trying to get a handle on, there's the big variation, whether that's dominated by a change in the cost per student or a change in the number of students, or some random.
It's a combination of both. We have, as enrollment goes up, even though perhaps our percentage of students, so say we have 16% of our students that have an IEP, which is approximately where it is. Well, if you have 100 students, but then you go up to 150, the number of students actually increases, the percentage doesn't. And that is happening, and since our percentage has actually stayed fairly stable over the last couple of years, but what we still know then is that we have more students that are getting services because the percentage is staying the same.
Understand how sort of the average cost relates to the total, the growing total school enrollment. And again, it's a statistical issue, all about predictability, which relates back to how do you manage. I mean, we manage snow and ice somehow, and it's even more unpredictable.
Right, so Alan, if
We
you
can
go to-
manage unpredictability.
Okay.
Alan, if you go to section 10, just to help you out with that, if you go to section 10 of your budget book, and then you go to the I always start with the last page of the
The
work.
manager's book or the school book?
No, school budget book.
School budget.
Okay. You go to the very last page, so section 10 is actually special ed costs, and the book does it on a trend, so 14, 15, 16, budget 17, 18, et cetera. So I always start at the last page and work my way forward. If you go to the last page of it, it shows you the total for special education expenditures by year. And then if you sort of roll back into the subtotals, you can see, just going across, what, I'm gonna call them buckets, probably not the right term, where the growth occurs. So if you then flip to the first cost center, which is high school 1, you can see in it, which is on page 1 of 9, you can see that the high school total was 641 in FY14, then it jumped to 854, 916, $1,035,000. And you kind of can go through the different parts to see how the model increases.
Okay, so it looks like the data to answer my questions is there. I have to do some number crunching.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, John?
If I may, I'd like to take you back to page 12 for a second. You're talking here about FTE social worker and social emotional learning and guidance, things associated, I infer, with emotional problems, maturity, et cetera. And I'm wondering if you've taken enough advantage of AYCC in this context, because, AYCC is really good now at getting payments for the services that they, outside payment for
Right.
the services. So I'm wondering if you might get a little bit stronger alliance with AYCC. I know that you do some with AYCC. I don't know how much.
We actually do quite a bit.
Yeah.
We actually give them also $40,000 every year
Yeah.
to support the programming, and we have, they're in different schools. We also have a partnership with them that we even had counselors come into the school, and if they've been identified as ongoing counseling, that we can do third-party payments. In fact, the third-party payments was something that the school department talked with AYCC about developing because the needs were
Yeah, they do pay.
tremendous.
Okay.
I
See,
think.
I didn't know that, so I'm glad to hear that.
Oh,
Yeah.
we're very
Because
much,
they've
in
been
fact.
very successful at that.
In fact, we would like to have more services from AYCC, and I'm probably discussing this in camera before I've talked with them, but we really would like to have more in our schools. I think that one of the things that you should know, and it's something that's true, it's not just Arlington, it's just across the state, across the country. We're seeing more and more students that have a lot of anxiety disorders. And
Sir, can you speak up a little?
oh, sorry. We have more students that have anxiety disorders at very young ages. And in fact, one of the reasons why you see the secondary cost centers going up more than the elementary is because that's about the age when these symptoms become more acute and not it really impacts them being in school. It is across our schools. And so our work is to help these students be able to manage in their lives, to deal with strategies, to deal with their anxiety so that they can access the curriculum. And this is something that our society in general is dealing with. I'm not going to talk tonight about all the potential reasons for that, what's happening, but this is the reality. And so when 15 years ago, we may have had one social worker for all of our elementary schools, and that seemed adequate, or maybe at least that was the assessment of it being adequate. That's not the case anymore. We have a social worker in every elementary school. And if you were, the principals of the middle school and the high school were here, they would say they could use more than we're even giving them. So it's a little bit different world, and our belief is that we need to support our students so that they can be the learners that they need to be and we want them to be. Could you hear me?
Yeah.
Good.
Charlie,
Okay.
did you want to follow up?
I was just going to mention to Alan that a couple of years ago I did a standard deviation on about 10 years worth of out-of-district tuition. And as I recall, one standard deviation was about $400,000. So, you know, having a couple of standard deviations of evaluation gets you to $750,000 or close to $1 million. But then you don't see that every year. And I did have a question. So in the special education budget, it looks to me like it's running about the two categories, the outside day tuition and outside residential tuition, in sum, are running 6.2, 6.2, 5.8, 6.6, and then the actual in fiscal year 2017 is jumping to 7.6. So there's, as you report, there's a jump in this year's tuition of close to $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
But my question is, why is it shown in fiscal year 18 as dropping from the residential tuition dropping from 3.8 million to 1.8 million?
I don't know the answer to that. I'd have to find out. I can tell you that our expectation is that the residential tuitions probably are not going to change next year. There's the possibility, but our expectation is no, they're going to stay the same. So I'm not sure why it's showing up that way.
I think you might have an accounting error.
Exactly.
What's going on, I think, is 6851 is going down $2 million. 6848 is going up $2 million. And so if you look at out-of-district tuition day students, that's going up 2.2. Out-of-district residential is going down 2.
Kathy, can I speak?
Oh, sure.
I'm Kirstie Allison-Ampe.
Could you stand up and,
Oh.
you know?
The mic is over here.
Okay. I'm Kirstie Allison-Ampe, I'm Chair of Budget. We had asked that very question on Thursday when Tony Mertz, our interim CFO, was there, and that was her assessment, is that it's an accounting error. There is enough money between the two buckets. We don't understand why it's moved in the one view. I'm wondering if it may be looking at different revenue sources, but anyway, that's basically it. It was felt to be an accounting error.
Just a little bit of a follow-up. My understanding is that if a student comes from another school district into the Arlington School District, or I suppose any district, school department, I don't know why I'm saying district, midway through the year, that the sending school, for want of a better term, that you can go after them for the cost of that education.
Yes, that's correct. When the sending school is a Massachusetts school.
Okay.
And I think it's April 1st. So they pick up the cost till that date, and then we pick up the cost the rest of the time. if a student moves in from out of state, which interestingly, the number of the students that have this year, moving from out of state, there is no formula like that.
Okay. Do you, when they move in from another Massachusetts community, have you been aggressively going after those funds?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
There's
Okay.
also another, if they come in and they were, their placement was at a collaborative, so if they were at the Assabet Valley Collaborative or the STEAM Collaborative, and that's where their placement was, they immediately become Arlington's expense. So if it's from if it's from a school district in Massachusetts, yes, it can be, we can do cost sharing. But if it's from a collaborative, which we have recently
That's
just
true.
uncovered, if it's
Yeah.
from another a special education collaborative, we have to pick up the cost.
Aren't collaboratives nothing but collections
One
of
would have-
other school systems?
One would have
Yes.
thought so, but
Yes.
unfortunately, that's how the
That,
regulations
That's
are.
strange.
yes, we just found this out because we had a student in a situation, well, I'm not sure it was at that particular collaborative, that was an
Right.
example, but
Right.
the idea is that for some reason, the rules with collaborative moves is not the same.
Okay, if you'd like to proceed.
Thank you. All right, so what are the recommendations and what has the school committee voted to approve in terms of the $300,000 from circuit breaker? Again, the focus is on supporting our high-need students, where this is going to be additional support to our principals in the area of social-emotional support. We will have a elementary math interventionist. We have a lot of students who need that kind of support. We have math coaches at the elementary, but one area that we sorely lack is sufficient number of people who actually work directly with students. Unlike in literacy, we are very short on literacy coaches, but we have reading teachers. And every school has a reading teacher. In fact, I think we have, different FTEs, but we have sufficient. Could we use more reading teachers? Yes, but we do have about 14 reading teachers. So we also need, one of the things we did not include in the budget that you have is the money for responsive classroom training this summer. We have had 3 years now grant-funded, week-long professional development in the summer for elementary teachers to learn about responsive classroom techniques. And again, this is part of our social-emotional work, and we did not have money for it, but that was a choice for this additional money so that we can host that again this year. And then, again, for retention and compensation for faculty and staff, we want to continue the leadership, professional development that we've been offered and have the focus next year be the middle school. And then, of course, enrollment growth. As I said to you about the 2 reserve positions before, those were already identified. We call them reserve, but we pretty much know where they're going to be. In fact, we may even need a 3rd elementary teacher, so that is another reserve position. We will have some additional teaching TA support for large classrooms, for one-to-one special education assignments if we need them. And then one thing that had been reduced, which I'll talk about in a minute, is we had to do about $750,000 worth of reductions out of this year's budget to meet some of the needs that I talked to you about already. And one of the things we reduced, which was a building sub at each of the middle school and the high school. Now, what does the building sub do at those schools? We don't really, at the high school, we do not get substitutes in when a teacher is ill or absent for another reason. Students go to Old Hall, which is a directed study, and they can work in the media center. But our building subs, we have 5 of them at the high school, man the front door, man Old Hall, circulate around, take care of attendance when students are not in class. But we had to reduce 1. At the middle school, it's pretty much the same thing. The building subs fill in for teachers. We try to fill them in the classrooms, but we often sometimes have to have students come to the cafeteria depending on the number of teachers that are out. So that's just basically filling back something we had already reduced to meet the, to have other things funded. So the next page, page 14, gives you a view of the total budget for FY17 and what the changes are for FY18. Now, when you look at the increase to the school budget from the town this year, it's actually about 6.5%. It's a very generous contribution to the schools. However, we have some offsets in revenue that actually bring the total revenue increase to 5%. And by the way, none of these numbers here are affected by the 300,000. This was just voted on last Thursday, and we have not been able to incorporate all this, because what you have to do, really, to do some good numbers, you really have to run the numbers through the whole budget, and that has to be done by our interim. But if you look on the next page, page 15, down in the area of grant totals, you'll see what I'm referring to. The expectation when we did this was that circuit breaker would be down nearly 200,000. And the other big change is the 250,000. Last year, we took a one-time reduction in the community school revolving account to fund curriculum. And we are not doing that this year. So that was part of our revenue stream last year and will not be this coming year. So those are the two big changes that we anticipate. There are some minor ones in addition to that. So the other thing is that one entitlement grant that we know is going to be reduced next year is Title I. And that'll be reduced by 150,000. And the reason why is that Arlington's poverty number, it's not our free and reduced numbers, it's Arlington's poverty number, seems to hover around the threshold number. And in fact, if you look at Title I funding over the last 5-6 years, it's sort of similar to special ed. It'll go up one year, then down another. It's that kind of oscillation around this threshold number. And we fully expect it to go down. What we are holding our breath about is whether any of the other entitlement grants will go away with the current budget in Washington. I've heard that that they want to do away with all entitlement grants through the Department of Education, which would be a disaster for our schools as well as other schools. Our entire mentoring program, which is, I think is excellent and gets better every year, is totally funded through that entitlement grant. And so we have to have a mentoring program, so I'm not sure if that does go away, how we're going to figure that out in this budget, but we have to. So that sort of gives you an idea of why the total increase is about 5%. And then you've... Mm-hmm.
Okay, Charlie?
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Bodie, we have maybe Dean knows this, but I can't pull it out of my failing brain here, but we have a formula for school revenues that we have been adhering to over the last several years, and that is, my recollection is that the base school budget increases 3.5% a year.
Yep.
And then there's a growth factor, and then the special education increases by 7%.
Correct.
Okay. So how does this number relate to that formula? Do we know?
Yeah, it's right
Which-
on. From the
which-
long-range planning committee, that is exactly, I'm looking at the February 6th, which I think is the latest that we've done. It's right on target.
At the 66?
At
Three-
the,
the
no, we only do the
69
appropriations.
69,928.
Right, 60,928,485 is
Is
exactly.
that, that's the number? Okay,
Yes.
Thank you.
It's the first thing I checked. Is there any
All
other?
right, now,
I
just quickly.
suppose that if Arlington's gonna lose title money, I would think Chelsea and Lawrence and Lowell
Oh.
and Brockton
Yeah.
will be
It's
We'll be
across the
killed.
board. It'll be awful. I think that, I read in the paper the other day that the potential devastation could be $1 billion to Massachusetts, and heavily into education, and of course, other social services as well. But the Title I could actually be wiped out as well, and Title I is what funds a number of our intervention programs for students. It helps to fund it. I shouldn't say it funds it completely. So anyway, the next couple graphs you've seen before, that's just with the recent numbers that we have for this year. And then on page 18, you'll see sort of some summary numbers of key numbers we've talked about here. And the thing to notice is the total reductions. We cut out $730,000, went through many line items of the current budget to see what can we do without next year, so that those budget priorities that we had talked about could be funded. See, after we did our salaries, which was about $2 million, and then we had the $1 million for out of district, what that left was about $150,000 for anything new for next year. And that's simply, that wouldn't even pay for the reserve positions we would need. So we went and did some reductions, and as you can see with the $300,000, a little bit of them was put back in terms of the building subs. And then I'd like Laura to talk a little bit about the technology priorities. You can read them, but I think just sort of the big picture items.
So as you've probably read in the papers, the Department of Education, the MCAS test is now being moved to an online platform. The department, basically you had to get an exception if you weren't going to test 4th and 8th graders online. The next year they're going to add 2 grades, and the last year they're going to add the last 2 grades, so that all grades 3 through 8 would be tested online by FY20. In order for kids to get ready for that, they really need to have a real depth and comfort with technology. And in some of our schools they have, and in others of our schools there's less. There's 4 teachers sharing a cart, so students are not getting the same depth in terms of access or equitable access. And so we'll be working on that through the generosity of the Capital Committee for next year continued. And then also, as we talked about, the intervention for our high-risk students, teachers are being asked to do more and more data crunching, and so we have a pretty high-level system that allows them to analyze student data. We also will be moving to what's called an online screener, so that every student in grade 3, 4, and 5, 3 times a year will take an online test for 45 minutes, so we can sort of see where their development is, so that we can project where they're going to be for MCAS for the next year, not they take the test, we think we know, we wait until September, we get the results, and then we find out whether we were right or not. We've taken on a screener that will allow us to predict, have better control of that during the school year. And finally, the thing that's causing us the most is that we've put a lot of investment in the last 5 years since I've been here in iPad 2s, and the operating system that runs on those iPad 2s will no longer be supported by Apple come October. So it doesn't mean that they'll all die. It just means as problems arise with them, or if we have to put a new version of an app on there, we will not be able to do that, because usually the new versions of the apps will run under the most recent operating system. We are not going to be able to replace 2000, and as a matter of fact, we're looking at a more cost-effective solution for grades 4 and 5, switching a device to something that's going to provide us with the same functionality, but with less cost. And finally, as we've said, we've increased staffing, and that means that those teachers have to have a computer, they have to have a projector, they have to have document cameras in order to have the same equitable access to technology across the district.
Okay, John.
When they say online, MCAS online, is that with an iPad? Is that what they do it on an iPad?
The vast majority of our students will actually doing it on a Chromebook, And Thompson Elementary School is the only school that will be doing it on iPads, and that's because they had one-to-one iPads. We had to buy sufficient devices for the other schools, and so since we had to buy the device, we looked at something that was more cost-effective, and Chromebooks are more cost-effective, and they have a built-in keyboard.
So is it all multiple choice then, or?
No, they actually have to type, they have to do open response questions.
What about math? How do they do math? What do they do
The
with
same
math?
thing, we have something called an equation editor, so.
Okay.
Primarily, multiple choice for grade 3, but when we get into grades 4 and 5, they have open response things where they have to type up mathematical equations
Okay.
and defend their answer.
Okay.
How, if I remember correctly, MCAS, when it started off, was basically 4th grade, 8th grade, and 10th grade.
It's great.
So now it's each year starting in 3rd grade?
Yeah, 3rd grade, 3 through 8, and then 9th grade takes science, and 10th grade takes English, language arts, and social, and math again.
Okay.
Um,
So for each of these elementary schools, for example, how long is the test take? Is it a day, is it an hour, is it?
So for each grade, students will spend 3 sessions of about 60 minutes. Well, that's, the test is supposed to take somewhere between 45 and 60 minutes. We have to add extra time because Massachusetts has made the decision to make it an untimed test. So we have to block off longer than that. And then they'll also have 2 sections of math. So English language arts happens in April and math happens in May.
I may add to that, because we do not have a one-to-one environment in every school, once this starts, our elementary schools are going to be doing MCAS every single day through the end of May. In fact, it's so tight that we had to move the kindergarten orientation day until June because we couldn't give up a day of testing.
So how many, for the average 4th grader, how many hours a year are taken away from classroom instruction?
From MCAS?
Yep.
Somewhere between 4 and 5.
4 and 5 hours out of a year.
That's math and English language arts. Then they're going to sit for, 5th graders will actually sit for a science test, which is another 2 hours.
Okay.
But if I may, there's got to be a lot of preparation for all this. I mean, you have to learn this equation and everything, right? You have to
We're-
learn that,
yeah,
which
we're-
is not something
yeah.
that appears out of the air. You have to learn all those things, so I
Right.
would guess it's, probably 5 days or something like that, all told.
Well, I don't know if it's that much. I mean, we really, because the more our students can be comfortable with the devices, the more we can incorporate that into the regular lesson. So they do
Okay.
regular lesson problems. So we
Okay.
try to avoid that as much as possible.
So bringing technology into the classroom is in a way even being forced by this.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, yes, it's being forced by that, but the reality of the kind of world that our students are moving into in careers and the work that they're going to do, it's increasingly technology
Oh,
dependent, yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
disagree with that at all. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
it-
But in terms
you're-
of the
You're actually
timing.
being pushed maybe even faster by this MCAS department, maybe.
It does allow us to get it will allow us eventually to get the test results back faster than we were getting it before.
Just one more question. Do you have problems ever whereby simply the piece of hardware is not working with the piece of software? I ask this question because I just had a problem with TurboTax. I couldn't believe it. But, TurboTax on my Mac got screwed up, and I had to spend a lot of time fooling around with Intuit to get that squared away. So does that kind of thing happen?
Oh, sure, and that's one of the reasons why we have another desktop support person in the budget for next year, because we don't even, right now.
What about when the MCAS test is going on?
All of our technology support staff, plus our one instructional technology person for the district, are all hands on deck to support the testing. So that means that it's very difficult for teachers to use technology for any other purposes during that time period, because we have such a limited number of devices that they have to all be used for testing.
Do you follow, I assume you do, are able to use the test results, say, for example, from one year to help in your teaching of the next year?
Yes, but that was one of the reasons why we went to an online screener, because we found one that has a strong correlation, has a correlation of about 0.82. to the MCAS results so that we can assess students during the year to see how they're making progress and where we should expect them to be for the MCAS.
One thing in the district we have is we have a very set schedule at all levels in terms of when teachers look at data. And it's been something that we've been working on year after year. So the answer is yes, but that's not the only data they look at. They look at common assessments, they look at they look at reading scores, and there's a variety of metrics in that. So it's a focus. They look at even just some of the tests they might give in their own classroom, because some teachers can do formatives as well that are not common assessments. So the culture is there. It's I think that, like anything, you want more time for it, but at least the structure is in place.
Thank you. Okay.
All right, so the one thing about special education, and it's worth repeating, is that one of the things we've wanted to do for communication about special education is to keep pretty much apples to apples from year in terms of what is considered special education and what is considered interventions, which help our students where they're struggling to get the support they need without necessarily having to have an IEP. We've been very very rigid about that, but the truth of the matter is that in a lot of the interventions that our students have are interventions that are listed on their IEP. This is something that we could take time to pull apart, but we're listing them and continue to do again this year is listing them as separate. But I think it's important for you to know that certainly with reading, I would say half the students in the elementary and sort of 100% of the students at the secondary level, they have reading on an IEP. And but we do not aggregate that data into our special education costs. So we've talked about interventions before. When you look at page 21, you get a look at the 6-year comparisons here of all the different general buckets of general education, intervention, special, professional development, administrative, and infrastructure. You know, one of the things that we're slowly increasing the number for interventions. It's a very slow increase. Again, a lot of that is mandated. But also for administration and infrastructure costs have remained fairly flat over this time period, while special education and general education have increased. And that's why this year our elementary principals have always said, put it into something, put it into social workers, put it into teachers. But finally this year, with the size of the schools, they've said, we need help. And not all the help we can give them, but we're listening and trying to give them some support. All right, so then you can look at special education by funding source. Clearly, the main funding source is special education money that appropriated by the town, the amount by circuit breaker. And I think one of the things you can see by circuit breaker is the variability, because it has to do with the expenses in another year as to how much money you have in circuit breaker. And then you have the grant total, which has been pretty flat over time. And that, by the way, is also potentially on the chopping block in Washington. So we've talked about the graph here and looking at the percentage growth in actuals from prior years. And so tonight, the action that we're looking from you is to respectfully request that your approval of the FY18 budget voted by the school committee last Thursday, March 16th.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Other questions from the committee? Paul?
On this page we just talked about what shows general education, intervention, special education, etc. Could it shows FY18 budget of $22,299,000 for special education. On page,
Repeat that again, Paul?
What page?
On page
the
21.
The one page before the
21.
presentation,
Page
21, page 21.
Yep.
In the budget book, in 1, 2, 3, just the fourth page into the budget book, there's another chart that shows special education costs for FY18 budget of $20,875,000.
I'm not sure, you're looking at
That-
this one here?
Right.
Oh, we found some discrepancies on that, that's why you don't have it. That will be, we're not sure where some of those came from, as we were looking at it, because we found the same issues that you
Okay.
did too. So we're gonna have to pull that out.
All right.
Which line are you talking about, Paul?
On this page,
Right.
it's special education.
Mhm.
22,
Okay.
the FY18 budget is $22,299,000.
We're hearing to the 7-year comparison by budget transfer categories. It's a chart, I believe, that you're comparing it to. One chart to another chart?
Mhm.
Right.
Yes.
That's what he's doing,
21,
yeah.
This chart
Yeah.
versus the chart that was in the
Right,
budget
yeah.
book.
Right. There's an error in that.
There's an error. I'm not sure how it got generated, but there's definitely an error in there.
Okay, other questions? Okay, Dean, the chart.
I'm gonna pull this up. I guess, not I guess, but I have to say I'm concerned that the budget's not balanced. I don't think I've ever said that before, or I should say it looks balanced, but it's balanced with no wiggle room. And what concerns me as we started to go through this is it felt like deja vu again. And I just want to read a couple things. This is from a 2010 Powers and Sullivan report. The first thing I want to read is it says, shown in Appendix D, the school department had a special education reserve account in fiscal year 2006 of $350,000 that was entirely used as of fiscal year 2010. The fund was not used for unforeseen and unanticipated costs during the fiscal year. Instead, $300,000 of the reserve was used in the school department's fiscal year 2008 and fiscal 2009 revenue budgets used to balance planned costs. This system of using reserves to balance the budget does not leave any flexibility for unforeseen costs during the fiscal year. I feel like we've started with repeating that again. I would then move on to,
May I make a comment on that?
can I get all three, and that way you can get all?
Oh, let's see if I remember all three, okay?
All right, go ahead. You can do
All
one at a
right.
time.
Take it one at a time.
Okay. There is one big difference. There's a lot of parallels. I don't disagree with you. In fact, even the situations that came to us in August are very similar. But one thing that is very different is that we do have some reserve accounts in the school district, which was not the case that year. There was no ability to have some flexibility with those additional costs. And, you know, our flexibility this year is that we had that stabilization account. We also have the tuition in account. And we've also found some savings with our new interim, Ms. Mertz has gone through with our new accountant, almost salary by salary to compare to the proposed budget to the actuals right now. And so when we've done that, we've also found some savings, because there's a volatility with people coming and going, leaves, short term. So we're able to find some identified savings there too.
Okay.
Can I just add to that with a question to follow up yours? For example, do you project the number of retirements, teacher retirements next year? Or do you budget fully for as they are now?
As they are now. Well, we're as they are in February. And
Right.
since February, I'm only aware of one retirement. We're in a different era in schools. Back in the early 2000s, for a number of years, actually it started probably in the late 90s, we always had a lot of people retiring every year, but the number of people that are retirement age and are among our faculty and staff is not many.
I raised that issue because of your predecessor, 2 predecessors ago, who would normally treat it as a reserve, the fact that she knows 5 teachers are retiring, and she's going to replace a $60,000 teacher with a $40,000 teacher, and therefore has $20,000 available. So that's not happening as much.
Well, that can happen, that a teacher will leave. I'm not saying that there maybe not be another retirement or 2, or a teacher leaving to go to another state who might be at step 8 and we hire somebody at step 2. Those things are going to happen.
Yeah.
But what can also happen is particularly in certain areas where there is it's difficult to find people that you may not make a savings. So there's this kind of action. But as far as retirements go, I bet there'll be less than a handful as we move toward the end of June.
All right, circuit breaker. I'm going to keep reading it. The town, in accordance with Massachusetts general law, records revenue on a cash basis. In accordance with this policy, the town has not accrued a receivable for non-grant related special revenue funds over the past 5 years. We reviewed the account zero balance of the town special revenue fund for the past 5 years and verified that the only receivable recorded was for the deficit in the circuit breaker fund, which was fully deferred. This means the town did not record revenue until the years the funds were actually received. So we all sat in here, I think, in the fall of 2010 in a very uncomfortable meeting. And we talked about how one of the problems that led to the deficit was this quick drop off in circuit breaker because we were spending the current year's circuit breaker in that year.
Right.
And one of the things that came out of the meeting was a comment from the school administration that doing this was speculative and something you wouldn't do again. Because we were spending all of it in the year where it was appropriated. And what happened, if you go to Appendix D, which they referenced, is the minute circuit breaker dropped off that year from what we thought, we were in a big problem.
Yeah.
But let me just,
Yeah.
but we're heading back there.
Not exactly, I would say, and Len might want to say something. What was different that year is that the CFO at the time had projected, which was a reasonable projection when the budget was done, that it would be reimbursed at 72%. Well, by the time we got to the spring and they got the actual budget, it had dropped to 42%. So meanwhile, you had the budget assuming, you were assuming a certain income from circuit breaker that did not happen. Then you add into a similar situation we had this year. So as soon as the school department was able to change the way we did circuit breaker so that you're always budgeting it, we wanted to do it. It was a safer way to go because you never know. And right now they're saying 70%, but you have to hold your breath until it gets through both houses.
Right. So I guess that's at least my big concern, right? And you're right, because I'm looking at it. Because back then the budgeted number for circuit breaker was 1.3 million. The actual came in at 900,000, so there was 400,000 there. And so if you think about it, and we don't really say it out loud at public meetings, the school department's always been walking around with this 1.9, 1.5, whatever you want to call it, $1 million reserve that nobody knows is there, which is the circuit breaker money. You could always pull it into the year if something went horribly wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we all accepted that was sort of a contingency on top of the special reserve fund. But this is starting to get different. This is pulling all the money into a current year budget. We're starting to pull, I know you're shaking your head, this is draining the $300,000 from the special ed reserve fund and pulling another $300,000 out of circuit breaker. So that's not a sustainable process.
What?
So this was our initiative, and this was our initiative, and Kathy did point out all the things that you're saying. So first, we have not been carrying the 1.9 million over. That was a new thing that we did just a few years ago. So it's a recent development. So if you look, I mean, we are still going to have $2 million at the end of 2018 in this fund. That's even more than we had in 2017. So the issue is, do we want to have 2.4 million sitting there, or do we want to have 2 million there? Because it jumps so much, because our expenses jump so much. So it's just a matter of taking some of that funding to smooth out the curve. We don't want to get in the practice of spending the circuit breaker funds early.
Yes.
That's where, we don't want to do that. We're just addressing this one-time occurrence of a spike in special education costs that we've had this year, that under our old practice, we will not get any of that money for 3 years. So it's just moving 300,000 up a year so that we can cover some of the expenses that we're incurring right now. So, I mean, we feel it's very conservative. Obviously, we understand that we don't want to drain that amount. I think we need to have a conversation whether that amount should be more visible, because we have $2 million sitting in an account that's not counted in the town's reserves. It's a large amount of money that, I think we should have a conversation about whether that should go into the new Special Education Reserve Fund that's under the Municipal Modernization Act, or still be hidden in the school department. That's a different conversation that we can have with the new treasurer and the town leaders. But we do intend to keep, $2 million in that account going forward.
So as a general, I guess, working agreement, I think what you're saying, I think what I'm hearing is, while 300 is coming out this year, 300 may come out next year. It's not going to be 300 this year, 500 the next year, 700 the next year. We're all on the same page.
Correct.
Okay.
None's coming out this year.
Well, the 300,000 that you're
Will
using.
go next.
That's what I mean.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
what I mean.
yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Other questions? Charlie?
So, I think I have an easy question, I'm not sure. But on page 21 in your presentation, I actually have several questions. The first one might be easy. The administrative and infrastructure cost drops from 9.2 million to 8.8 million. Is that an accurate representation, or is that, am I missing something? And if you're going down by roughly 400,000 a year, how are you accomplishing that savings?
In terms of the infrastructure? Well, I think it's not so much I'd have to go through all the budget details in the workbooks, but in terms of administrators, we are not changing the number of administrators. In fact, in the budget, we're looking, as you know, for the director guidance and social emotional, as well as a little bit more support assistant principal. So it's more of in the infrastructure, which would be all of the there'd be other costs in there, utilities and so forth.
So this is a real decrease in budget.
I think that this is, I think when FY17 was projected was when we were in negotiations. And instead of putting all of the additional, the expected increase in the teaching the general education budget, and put the money into the administration to make it less clear how much money there was, so that it would make it better for negotiations for our side. And I think this number is not clean. It later gets moved back in the actuals, but
To
this
general
number-
education.
Yes. Yeah, I don't think that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Then, so I just want to make a comment that I think that the school department, with respect to the appropriation, is sticking to the budgeting formula of the long-range plan with respect to the 3.5% growth and the 7% growth in the general education and special education budgets is generally a good thing, and to be congratulated. And I guess I'm, with respect to the special education, I'm sorry, to the circuit breaker reserve fund, I mean, I think the idea of using it is not so outlandish. I mean, it's there to be used at some point or another. So I think you're using it to solve a real problem. But what I would like to ask of the superintendent of schools and the school committee is for a commitment, a long-term commitment to spend to the 3.5% growth only in the general education budget. And if you have a savings in the special education budget, so that it's not 7% growth, it's 6% or 5% or 4%, that you take that difference and put it in a reserve fund so that you don't have the sort of problems that we faced in this year. Because you would have walked into this year with $2 million more, or more. And the reason that, I can't speak for everybody, but the reason why I was in agreement with the 7% was because we would use that differential for special education, not to increase the funding for general education. And I think that the practice, the way it's been done the last several years, is just wrong, in my personal opinion. And it means that you know, just because you have an idea that you'd like to do something new this year in education doesn't mean that you have to do something new. It's a nice thing to do. But you have to have the discipline to do only what you can afford. And if you take the money from the special education students and spend it in general education, then you won't have it when you need to spend it on the special education students. That's the end of my pitch. So I look forward to seeing your commitment at town meeting when you make the presentation.
Well,
Okay, go ahead, Ken.
if I may, I thought her explanation was that it wasn't being spent this year on, you know, additional educational kinds of things. It's, the problem is the increased population. At least that's what I inferred from what you said.
John, I'm
Yeah.
talking about past years. If you look on page,
Yeah, I understand.
this page.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
these drops.
Yeah.
They represent multi-million-dollar
Okay.
reserves.
Yeah, but
But they spent
it's
it.
my impression that they're going in the direction that you wanted, but it didn't work out this year
No,
because of the
it's
increased
not true.
population.
They spent
Did I infer that?
all the money on general education in those years.
Well, why don't we let the superintendent answer?
Well, I did address it earlier, saying that in the years where it really spikes, there are things in general education that are depleted, that are not spent in general education, and in fact, probably go below the 3.5. We could, with our new CFO, we can actually do perhaps that kind of analysis. In fact, started to look at that issue. But, so that's one issue. The other is that special education costs are not we actually have costs that are not represented for special education outside of this special education bucket that we're keeping somewhat pristine so we can compare year to year. Our number of students that actually now have reading services, math goals, which these are mandated, this is not discretionary, they're captured in the general education right now. And so what happens is when you have more students coming to us, we are actually spending more on special education. That's even reflected in these special education numbers, and it's growing. But we're not capturing it there. We're capturing it in general education. But that's one issue. So there's just so many factors going on. It's hard to say that in a year we don't do some curriculum and materials that we need because we can't do it, that we should, and that maybe, see, I'd have to go and do the numbers to see if that happened, that we should not do it the next year if we had the money to do it. So yes, there might be some movement this way, I agree, but when you look at it over the whole, we're sticking pretty well to the goals that we've all set out for us, for the district.
So, if I may, Mr. Chairman, I'd just make 2 comments to that. One is that if indeed your spending is as characterized, then you have an accounting problem, because you're not labeling your expenses as they should be labeled. And that means you don't know what you're spending, which is a bad place to be.
Well,
The second comment I would make is that it's difficult not to spend money when you have a little bit extra. But that's how you avoid these problems, is you put it into the sugar bowl and you come back and get it in the future. And we haven't done that. And we have to start doing it.
One of the things that's happened since that time period in 2010 is that we have maintained reserves in the school department for these kinds of more difficult years financially. I think your point is correct, that we don't fully represent it, and I think that in order to do that, then you would have to give up the year-to-year comparisons and set a new baseline. And that's something we can talk about doing.
You can go back and read this real quick, 'cause it's not hard.
Kathy? The other thing we'd have to do is, in the past, when we talked about setting up a special education reserve account, back when we thought we could do it originally, we were told by Finance Committee that they wanted a cap on it, and that cap needed to be, there was a concern that it would be too big, and the cap was set at 2 times an out-of-district tuition. So that's $800,000. So we can't, what you're talking about doing right now, we couldn't do under those constraints. So that would have to be something else that would be discussed. But in the past, there had been a maximum on what we were allowed to set aside. And it's not nearly what you're talking about.
Okay, Paula and then Carolyn.
On page 22 of the presentation, in the line for special education that the town that has come from the town appropriation. First off, I assume this really was spent on special education.
It is, we've defined what's in special education. That's what we're trying to keep it the same from year to year so you can see that. But yes,
So-
it's that bucket that we've defined.
So it should be noted, Charlie, that the compound growth from fiscal 11 to fiscal 18, according to these numbers, is 7.5%. So this indicates that they've actually spent on special education at a rate that is higher than the 7% that we allocated.
Okay, Carolyn?
So if we go back to page 21, what I think I hear you saying is that special education, that line item is very narrowly and strictly defined.
Yes.
And then interventions is all of that extra money. The money that is spent on kids for reading and for math to get them up to their MCAS requirements. Is that accurate, or does intervention cover other things?
That's pretty much what the interventions are. There any kind of support that we give students. This is separate, by the way, from ELL, English Language Learners.
Right.
Yes, these are all the supports, the math support, the reading support. That's pretty much.
Pretty much. There
yeah,
might be
it's-
some students that get social emotional support from a social worker that is not strictly in the social, sorry, my quotes here, but the special education budget. So there are some social workers that are specifically for special education needs, because they're associated with a small learning community, a specialized learning community, but there are other social workers that are not just dealing with special education students, therefore their salary is shown in the general education
general,
budget,
mhm.
but they may very well have in their IEP that they get 30 minutes or 40 minutes of counseling a week. So that also would be included in there, and that is also growing. And so those things, and again, it was just that they was trying just to compare year over year.
Right.
We tried to have a very strict definition of what was special education.
Right. It would be great if we could have and other people can disagree with me, but from my perspective, have a broad definition of interventions and have that budget go over rather than cutting into general. Rather than having general funds spent increase for interventions. Does that make sense on some level?
I mean, pull it out, Carolyn?
Don't pull it out of special ed.
No.
But, you know, Charlie's concern is we're spending money in general ed on years, from general ed, on years when we have special ed money extra, we're spending it in the general fund. I would rather see it spent or see us under budget in intervention, so we know that that money is actually for intervention type things rather than new IT stuff, say. If you're gonna get new IT stuff, then, and you're gonna use special ed funds for new IT stuff, I can understand Charlie's concern for that.
Yeah.
Right, but that's where that's where I wouldn't say we have like a whole bunch of new things,
Yeah.
but we have had an increase in interventions. And so I hear what you're saying, that may be showing up in the general education increase, and you'd like to see that shown in the intervention. I see, sure.
Right, but all the intervention that you see here is in the general ed and is part of that 3.5%.
Okay, so
It's-
this intervention part goes under, is a
Goes on
subheading
top.
of general ed?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and so
Okay.
what I'm saying is that
Right.
the truth of the matter is, some of it really are special education costs.
Right.
But in order to have this comparison from year to year, we've kept very strict definition of what's in that.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
And that's fair. No problem with that.
Yeah.
Peter?
Thank you. Kathy, in this loose leaf notebook, in section 2, there's a dozen pages, more or less, that it's generally called requested and unfunded carryovers from FY17.
Right.
And almost all of them are unfunded.
Right.
I guess my first question is, do these various requests come from that whole group of people that you listed in the beginning? Or
And teachers,
And
we
teachers.
involve teachers in the.
so anybody that has a bright idea gets into this list?
No, this is a cold list. If I gave you every bright idea, this would be much longer. No.
These are the bright ideas.
These are the bright ideas. These are the ones that there's a lot of unanimity of opinion on.
So my question is, you obviously you've decided that they're not bright enough to be funded or be particularly concerned with. What's the benefit of putting them into this book for the public to read?
So that the public can be aware of when we.
How
I think,
terrible we're doing?
No, I think we're doing quite well, actually, in terms of what the product is of the Arlington Public Schools. I think we're doing very well. And we're doing very well because we have such a talented teaching staff and we have some very motivated kids. Mr. Hayner would like to mention.
That in order to stay within the agreement, the 3.5% and the 7%, this is what we want. This is what we feel would enhance the programs and keep the programs going and do it. You heard the superintendent had to say, there had to be a balance this year to determine things that we really need this year. In order to get them to stay within that thing, they had to reduce things that we already had going. So there's going to be a change. The reason to put them in there, in my mind, is to let the people know this is what we really. Bill Gates dropped a check of $1 billion. We'd have this. Only solve half the problems, folks, because we don't have land.
Okay, other questions from the committee for the superintendent? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, John.
Well, it's maybe more a statement than a question, but your projection is that in FY18, you're going to have something close to 5,850 or something like that students, is that right? Okay, by my calculation, then the gross cost per student, that's $66.3 million, is $11,300, something like that, $11,350. Given the quality of the schools, that's a great number. There's no question that our schools are a great buy.
There. They are. Mhm.
Okay.
Thank you.
Remember, actually, you could go on the Department of Education, I still call it DOE, because the other one has too many initials. Website, you'll see a lot of the per student spending. Now, the difference is that the ones on the website will be higher, because it'll include money from our pension budget, it'll include money from our health insurance budget, and I think a few other things. But it's an interesting statistics to look at. Okay, Alan and then Charlie.
I basically just wanted to thank you for considering alternative devices to iPads. I think for 2,000 of them, you save about $500,000 over the years, because iPads are just grossly overpriced. So thank you.
Okay, Charlie?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to comment on Paul's comment on my comments. And I think it's also very illustrative for the school department to look at this graph on page 22. And the fact is that in fiscal years 14, 15, and 16, you see the green lines are flat, okay? So there was no growth or very little change year to year in those budgets. So if you take a budget of $15.6 million and you multiply it by 7%, you get approximately $1 million. So there's 3 years in a row where $1 million a year was spent on general education and not put into reserves for special education. And if that $3 million a year were available now, the school department would not have the problem that we're facing.
Okay, are there any, Dick?
What percentage, I didn't get it, what percentage of the general population is at the special ed?
About 16%.
Okay, now okay, Stephen?
Yeah, and this is more comment than question. I understand that you're, because we're in between CFOs, it's not really fair to go line by line on different things. But I'm just wondering, as part of the hiring process with the CFO and the new transitions, there are going to be an effort to maybe try to improve what's being reported, maybe even simplify some things here, because we saw some discrepancy in special ed, for example, and you see that throughout the book, frankly, where there are some subsets of special ed that you see in the document. You see some numbers with transportation, you see some numbers without, and I think there's a number of categories in here, and then members may disagree with me, that it's almost too much information that isn't meaningful because there's so many categories, and I'm just wondering, as part of this transition, is there a discussion to try to do things in line with, okay, good.
Yes.
And the other thing I have to say, and this has come up every year for me, question for me for the past 6 or 7 years, but it's been a big frustration, that we never receive actual revenues from revolving accounts and reimbursements. I know the school committee receives that in the monthly reports from the CFO, but if we look at section 3, and it's a one-pager, we get budget numbers every year. And I think, just as expenses are important, it's important to know what your revenues are for different categories, whether you're meeting them, and sometimes you find out after the fact. For example, building rentals, that revenue item seems to lag what's being budgeted every year, yet all we get is budgeted numbers here. And I think it would be helpful for us and for the community to report that, be more transparent. So that's just a comment.
May I?
Sure.
Well, first of all, yes, we are definitely thinking about it as more simplified and looking at some best practice budgets, so that will be involved. And be happy to hear your suggestions when we get to that point. As far as the revolving accounts go, that's what you're looking where they are. They can be quite volatile. That's why having something that's just here in a book that at a particular point in time might not be that helpful.
Yeah.
Take
Actually,
facilities.
Actually, I just want to clarify, I agree with you for the current year, but I think we could know what happened in fiscal 15, for example, in the fiscal 17. I'm talking historical, not where you are right now, but I mean, I'd like to see what the actual was for 16 and for 15, and I think it could be produced, it just never has been.
Let me see if I understand what you're asking. Are you looking for the revolving accounts, what the balances are at, say, the end of a fiscal year?
No,
you know,
I'm looking for
let me-
actual revenue. Well, hang on one second. Like, for example, athletic fees, you budget $260,000 every year, yet we don't see what was actually
We don't have any actual.
collected for a given year. I'd like to see what was collected for fiscal 15, for example, or what was collected for 16, as opposed to just seeing budgeted numbers every year.
I see.
So here I have a fancy sheet that is probably what you're looking for. Because, so what we never get to see is like, let me go find that fancy building fund. Oh, there it is. We never get to see, so here's the beginning balance of the building fund. Here's what went in, here's what came out, here's the ending balance of the fund.
Mhm.
We just get to see, here's what we budgeted to take out. We never see how any of it worked. So unless you call the comptroller and ask for this,
Mhm.
you don't really know what happened. We don't know what happened.
But I think that Steve is also asking for looking at actuals in these different line items of what was spent
Yeah.
in the different in the transfer buckets.
Yeah, but I actually was more focused the past several years on the revenue, the revenue items that we weren't getting, but it's just a presentation thing that I think could be improved.
Okay, I think there was one more, Paul?
Just two quick questions. One is, will you be asking the finance committee for a reserve fund transfer this year? Do you anticipate?
Yes, but not for our budget. Though there is one issue that we'll have to work out, but no, the main reason we might is Addison heater. When it first went, and it went back in the fall, we thought we could fix it for 60,000, which probably would have depleted that facilities account at the time, but the more analysis was done, said it had to replace it, so it's a $250,000 item. And in the facilities budget, there is not $250,000. Generally, we raise about $350,000 in the facilities, and it goes like this in the year, depending on what's being used. 100 of that goes for custodians, and the other 250 is available for repairs. And basically, I think of that money in that account as facilities department money that they use for the various repairs. But this particular amount is just, it's too large. And we have to have it, we have to have heat.
Oh, the kids are spoiled.
My second question is, when do you anticipate hiring your CFO?
We're hoping that a new CFO will start July 1.
Okay. Okay, Dean?
So just a comment on the budget as you move forward. I heard when you, I think said to Steve that you were going to look to change the format of the budget. I guess it's, when I think back historically, the last time we had a substantive change to the budget was when the prior CFO arrived in 2010. And what happened at that point, and I think it wrongly happened, was that the change that the prior CFO made was to the prospective reporting, so the numbers moving forward, and she didn't do it in a manner that made the prior year numbers comparable anymore. So if you recall, we spent 2 years in this odd scenario. We did, you did, they did, where the answer to any questions on a historic trend analysis was, well, I don't know, because I changed the format of the process. And so it would seem, and this would just be my reminder, that if the school department, school committee, whoever endeavors to change the budgeting format again, that it has to be done in a way where the retrospective numbers and the prospective numbers get pulled into the new format together. Or otherwise, you guys are gonna end up in that same spot you did 6, 7 years ago, where you can't look back.
Well, Agreed. We can look back. I actually was working with a new accountant. Munis can go back to FY12, but we have to look at the codes, because sometimes how things get coded can make things a little confusing.
Yeah.
And that's been one of the challenges in trying to put some other reports together. So I don't disagree with you. To have a retrospective, to have some comparison is going to be important. How we structure that will, pull you in to make some suggestions.
Any other questions for the superintendent? Okay, there is an article, Article 5 in the special town meeting, transfer of funds, special education stabilization fund. And so my understanding is that the school department would like us to transfer the balances there back into the fund to help with the deficit in fiscal 17 this year.
Yes, into the FY17 appropriation, not with the budget.
Budget.
Yeah.
We're not going to vote on that tonight because there's a little confusion as far as the exact balance there, but we'll deal with it Wednesday or Monday fairly soon. Any other questions? Charlie?
How much are you asking to transfer?
I think basically the whole thing.
Whatever in there.
Okay, I'd like to thank you very much, Superintendent Bodie, both of you, from Assistant Superintendent, for coming in, plus the 3 members of the school committee. I appreciate your time.
Let's do this again next year.
I'm sorry?
Again next year.
Do it again next year.
Thank you
Same
very
time,
much.
Thank
same
you.
time. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, the request from the school department for an appropriation is $60,928,485, which is the same as the amount recommended from the long-range planning committee. That it includes the 3.5% special education, 3.5% general education increase, 7% for special education, as well as the growth factor, which is the amount of money per student cost is determined by the state times the number of new students. And that is $1,133,528. So the total's up to $60,928,485. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any discussion? Brian?
I'm not sure, and I didn't want to put the superintendent on the spot, but going forward, are they going to be asking for substantially more next year? Not meaning fiscal year 18, but going forward, in the context of the 5-year plan. And because as I sit back, I look at the increase from the 5-year plan for the school budget's $3.7 million. The total increase in revenues for the town is $3.8 million. So basically, the school budget has eaten up everything as it is every year. And it's not necessarily their fault, but nonetheless, there's basically no growth anywhere once we take up the school budget. And I only see this as getting worse, not better. And I'm with Charlie. Because I was the one over year after year. It would their expenses were 14 million and change that they were showing us, and they were budgeting 16 million. So it was more than a couple of years that they had that situation. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how you cut it. They're just getting the whole time. And I'm not saying that I'm not even sure I have an opinion on it because of the fact that they're growing so much. It's not their fault. I'm not sure that it's mismanagement. If there was, and I'm not going to say mismanagement, that's the wrong word. If any mistakes were made, I'm in a total agreement with Charlie that they should maybe have $3, $4, $5 million in that reserve.
Is it going to keep growing to that? Yes, as long as the enrollment grows at a couple hundred a year, then their budgets.
So basically, whatever our formula is what the number's gonna be, regardless of however you slice up the bottom line.
I mean, if the school school department per pupil expenditures was 10% over the statewide average, that'd be one issue. In this case, it's not, it's below the statewide average. So, I don't think you're talking a huge amount of money, but the increase is what the increase is, and in 2021 or maybe sooner, there'll be a need for an override to support it. It's sort of a fact of life. Charlie?
Al, you think there's a possibility that we don't have the right per pupil growth formula in the long range plan? I mean, if the only way we can, if you interpret what they're saying, the only way they can meet their obligations is to take money from the special education budget, and then when the special education budget needs it, they're basically hung out to dry. Okay. And I don't know that they can ever get to the point where they exercise the discipline to stick to available revenues and put these reserves aside. But I just think we're on the wrong path, the way it's being done.
Of course, it's not just the superintendent's budget, it's the school committee's budget. And there's a lot of demands for services and not a lot of money, and this is how they're dealing with it. I'm not sure, from a budget point of view and a fiscal discipline, we could say one thing. On the other hand, if you're trying to provide services for children, here I sound like a school committee person now. You're looking at it from a different angle, and that's the angle they were elected to look at it. I'm not sure if it's from one point of view it's not the way to go. From another point of view, it's absolutely essentially the way to go. So I leave that up to this committee. Okay, a motion's been made and seconded for appropriation of $60,928,485. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Unanimous voting. Favorable action. The other article, which is the transfer from the stabilization fund, got a little confused. They thought there was more money in it than the controller thinks there's more money in it. And I've got to go back and do a little research myself. But you remember, I think it was 2 years ago, maybe 3, when they wanted to put money into the account, but they couldn't tell. It was a couple.
They didn't have an article.
That's right. They didn't have an article, so we were trying to figure out a way to do it. And the way to do it was for us to make a transfer into their fund.
In our fund.
Right. They allowed a certain amount of money to go back to free cash, which they did. And then the next year we transferred it to them, and then the town meeting transfers it into the fund. I think in all that, plus the change in controller, it didn't quite get booked properly. So that's why we're, Rich Viscay is trying to track it down. Right now, as far as he says, it's $200,794.
I'm sorry, how much?
$200,794.
That sounds about right. I thought it was about 200,000.
So, and I think the amount that they went back into the general fund was 200. No, actually, it was a little bit more. And the amount that we transferred was 200,000. So, where did the 125 come? So that's what we're trying to figure out. And Rich Viscay and the interim CFO is working on that. So, I'll come back at that point. Okay, we've got 20 minutes. Who has a budget? Okay, Bill, I think you're doing insurance?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, everybody, let's get our budgets out.
quick statement. There's a revised budget for fiscal 2018 that is not in this book, but was sent out a few days ago by Liz, and in a PDF form rather than print 300 pages. So if you have a device and want to get that up now, or if you printed it, that would be great.
It's not, but the budget itself didn't change, right?
It did, yeah, there were changes in the budget. Yeah. In the bottom line and also in the GIC rates changed. So what I thought I'd do, if everybody's ready, is to take a look at group health insurance. And
Okay, so we're on 177 of the, we've only got 6 or 7 numbers, so if you could just go through one and we can mark it in and
Okay,
change.
so I think the significant thing, let's just drop down to line 5704. The insurance group health, this is the GIC. And this particular number came out very favorably. It's up 1.62%. And in previous years, it's ranged anywhere from 11.1 to 8.4. So it's interesting because this is group health, and most people expect things to go up. So I think one of the questions that we had is, how do you keep things down at 1.62? So I'm just going to ramble off a few of the reasons that Karen gave us through Sandy for the rate of 1.62. So there's a major plan design, or major plan designs with many of the PPOs and the HPOs. And in those plans, the amount that was picked up by the town had been, generally speaking, 80-20. So 80 picked up by the town in terms of premiums and 20% picked up by the employee. And a lot of the new plans actually have gone to 75% for the town and 25% to the employee. Now, it may not sound like a lot, but when you course it over 40 plans and 400 plus employees, it does create a factor. In addition to that, retirees are now paying for their own medication. Retirees can stay on the plan, the GIC plan, once they're over 65, if they're still working. But there's a Medicare penalty for that. But in any event, they're paying for their co-pays and they're paying for their medication. The opt-out program also affected the low increase in the group health of 1.62. In the opt-out program, as you probably know from previous years, the town makes out very well. It encourages, well, not encourage, but perhaps it encourages employees to opt out of the GIC. Now, if they do that, they get paid $2,000 to $3,000 per year. But now they're up to the employee to go out and get their own policy.
And that usually happens where you have two spouses working and another spouse already has the policy, so they actually, the family itself will generate extra revenue by only having the one policy.
What happens if they had already been on the spouse's policy?
Well, it's my understanding that they get paid each year to be
They
off.
get
but-
paid each year to be off,
Okay.
regardless of where they're going. And then the other thing, I was just going to say very interestingly, is that Karen said with a lot of the new hires, there are younger people coming into the workforce here in the town, and many of them are still under their parents' health insurance. This is the new age of staying at home and staying under the umbrella of your parents' health insurance to age 26 or 27.
And apparently that's through the school system, and there's a lot of turnover in that particular area because they're coming in and helping out. So they don't ever really anticipate it going up.
You have more trustee too, right?
And they're healthy, so their rates are going to be lower. So that's the opt-out program. If you want to just take a look, if you look at page 5, it gives a little bit of a detail about the comment I made a second ago about plan design changes and how this affected the GIC rates and the amount the town is paying for insurance. So very briefly, on the left-hand side, you see the health plan name. Just drop down, there's 3 plans in particular to look at. The Harvard Pilgrim Independence, you see that? And then Harvard Pilgrim Primary Choice, and then Tufts Health Plan Navigator. So these are 3 plans that are available for employees. The first 2 I mentioned, the Harvard, represent 70% of all enrollees' healthcare choices. So 70%. And if you look at the amount of increase for both Harvard Pilgrim Independence and Harvard Pilgrim Primary Choice, the first one is 1.0% and then 1.7%. So these are very popular, and I think it has pulled or kept the overall GIC rate down. Every plan either goes up or comes down every year, so it's always a mixed match of different plans. And if you want to look further, you can go to page 2A, and that gives a little more detail as to what the full cost is for each of the plans. I was talking to Karen on the phone the other day, and she said that they go through every single individual that works for the town and looks exactly at everything that they're getting, what they're paying. So, this is a very good deal for the employee, the town employees, and I think the town is managing it very well. So that's what I want to say, I guess, pretty much about the insurance group health. Are there any questions?
Was the plan changed to 2575? Was that negotiated, or was that
It's after the date that they started, as of a certain start date. So
earlier employees are
right.
grandfathered in, okay.
Yeah, there's a grandfathering in. And there's also a little bit different rate PPO plan versus HMO. But the general trend seems to be damping things down and keeping the overall rate of increase very low. So that's why we came up with 1.62%.
So what is the dollar amount now for 5704?
Dollar amount is $15,351.035, and that's a $245,128 increase from the year before.
So 15,351,035.
Correct. That's just for line 5704.
Okay.
If you want to follow that down to past the offsets, the total is $16,207,743, which is an increase of 2.09, well within the 3.5%. I'd be happy to talk about any one of the other lines if people have questions.
I'm sorry, you mean 16 million?
I'm sorry?
You mean 16 million?
What did I say?
16,000.
Which would be a great deal.
Yeah. I said that last year too. So I guess I got them.
So is the offset the same, 713, 726?
Yes.
No,
it's 685.
What is it?
685, 289. Just down.
So the growth insurance taxation total after the offset is how much?
16,207,7.
16,207,743.
16207,743.
And then what's the number up above for the group health again, 15?
351,035.
Both 35.
Okay, thanks.
So
Okay, the rest of the numbers stayed the same? The Medicare penalty, the opt-out program, group life, payroll, and flexible benefit?
For the most part, yes.
Actually changed by $1.
Yeah, but I was gonna say, is each of these other lines in some way directly or indirectly affects the GIC, which is sort of the bottom line way of looking at group health.
Okay,
The
so
update's actually gone down.
Just for the record, the opt-out program is 221996.
221.
996.
And
So
then-
now it'll flip.
What's the group health insurance appropriation total now? The one that used to be 17.2?
16,893,032.
Okay.
Before offsets.
Right, before offsets, right.
Speaking of offsets, when do we bring that Hydra-headed monster up?
I'm sorry?
The offsets, may need adjusting. They don't seem to match some of the other numbers, like on page 17.
Okay, so those are the offsets from the water and sewer?
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's focus on this first. Okay, so are you making a motion for 16,207,743?
I am.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Questions? More discussion? Okay, motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I'll abstain.
Okay, so why don't we just flip over to the liability insurance and spend a few minutes with that. That's on the revised budget, go to page 12 in the handout, whether you have it printed or whether it's on your PDF.
Or, yeah, can you just tell us the numbers too as you go along? Tell us the changed numbers.
Well, okay, I guess I could do that. I don't know how important that is really, because these are numbers that they provided us based on changes in information that they have, including the new rates.
Oh, not just on the budget itself, not in any attachments.
Okay. All right, that sounds good. So, the workman's comp was down $40,000, which is down 7.41%. And the comment that was made was that Health and Human Services are doing an excellent job of managing workman's comp cases. And
Workers' comp.
right,
Workers' comp.
workers.
So I'm sorry, what is that amount now?
What is that
I
now?
don't understand the time.
It's just straight 500?
I expect, no, you don't.
So was that now just 500,000?
Okay. Just manage it,
Right,
right?
500,000 is the request.
I can't manage mine.
It's down 40,000, which is down 7.41.
Okay.
If you read the letter that was drafted and sent to the town manager, and the workers' comp benefit attorney, he recommends 500,000 for fiscal year 18. And there's a lot of detail in that letter if you want to take a look at it, but I think that's why they came up with 500,000 for workers' comp.
Are there any other changes?
Not of significance, I
Okay.
think. So if you just want to drop down to, after the offset to liability insurance tax total, is 31,818, and that is a decrease of 13,182, and a percent decrease of minus 1.26%.
So is that your motion?
Yep.
Second. Okay, motion's made and seconded. Any questions? Okay, all those in favor, please, of 1,031,818, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Okay, unanimous. Okay, Bill, do you have any other budgets?
I do. I also have the 4 articles, 25, 22, 23, 24, 25. I'll hold those for.
Yeah, why don't we just stay with budgets right now? Next one up is the reserve fund. Who does that?
I do with the help of my team.
Yeah,
So, if you look at the reserve fund, no changes, that's in the budget book, page 180. And the change was an increase of 41,440, which is a 2.83% increase. I think there's been a goal, a stated goal of keeping this figure, the reserve fund, at about 1% of the non-exempt budget. And because we're right there, I recommend that we approve the reserve fund, $1,506,440.
Okay. Do I have is that your motion?
Yes.
Second.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any questions on this? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous? 3:20, the first day of spring.
But one more, if we have time. Got one
Sure.
more budget if you like. So the next one is the assessors, the town assessor, which is page 55. So what's I think significant here that affected the assessor's salaries, that affected the assessor's expenses and the assessor's total, was the increase 5.6% in salaries and wages, total of 14,813. But that's easily calculated if you want to drop down to the salary detail, and if you go to the far right chart, fiscal year 2018, do you see that? And just go over to the new pay and drop down to the total, and that's your 279,259. Do you see that? So that's the 2018 fiscal year request. Now, where did that come from? Where I think a lot of things sort of hit this year. If you look at Paul Tierney, the assessor, there's a $6,000 increase, then a $3,000 increase by the office manager, a $3,000 increase by the data collector, and $2,000 by the clerk typist. So all of these basically are longevity and step increases that just hit this year. We're hitting for the next fiscal year. So that's why it might seem a little high, 5.6%, but that's not likely to happen next year, just because I think that hit this year.
Yeah, other steps.
Another step, yeah.
So, is the number you're recommending as printed 313,707?
If there are no further questions, sure. So 313,707. That's a 5.31% increase to the assessor's budget. Your motion?
Okay, is that your motion?
Yes.
Second?
Second.
Okay, discussion, questions? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous, 320. Okay, in compliance with the Mary Ronan rule, now, the first thing we'll do on Wednesday, please all be here. I want to, now we're on a run to finish everything.
No minutes so far.
Okay, so we'll do the minutes, 2 days of minutes, first thing off the bat. So please read the minutes, and then we'll just start with the budgets, and just go through them. And then once we finish the budgets, we'll go through the warrant articles, and keep working on these through Wednesday and then into the following Monday. Any questions? Okay, meeting adjourned.